Alright, everyone, so here we are. This is my favorite albums of 2022 video. This has been a bit of a long time in the making. I'd hyped up on Twitter some ideas that I might have had to do, something a little different with it, but it didn't quite pan out. No matter which way I tried to write the script for it, it always kind of ended up just a little janky. So I'm just going to do this as a regular top albums list. Now, I'm not scripting any of this. This is going to be just completely off the cuff. I've got, a list in front of me on my computer screen, and I'm just going to go for it. So, here we go. Also, as I'm sure you can maybe tell, because of where this is getting posted, I am planning to revive this channel. Again, nothing's really going to be scripted, but, considering that last year I quit working for Ultimate Guitar doing reviews, I do kind of miss doing reviews, but I really do want to get kind of back into making reviews that are just more, my kind of music, as opposed to, whatever is kind of just put on my plate. So, we'll see where things go. We've got some really cool new releases coming out from Haken, Riverside, Camelot's putting out some new music, all kinds of artists, Periphery, all coming out with new music soon. I'm sure I'll have lots of great new music to talk about. So let's just dig in. So first and foremost, I do want to say a little bit about 2022 in general, because I've done a couple of these videos in the past, for the last, several years, where I've listed my favorite albums of the year. And I've always had a much easier time than I am with this particular year, because I found that this year was kind of rough. A bit of a bad year, a bit of a cluster heck of a year for music. A lot of really decent releases, but not a whole lot of really great releases. Things that stood out to me as being particularly fantastic. Whereas, every other year, there's usually at least one or two really good records that come out that blow me away. There was not really any of that this year, but, there were some good records, so I still need to get into them. I'm going to start at number 10 with one that's actually going to come up again, but it's Porcupine Tree's Closure and Continuation. It's really cool to see Porcupine Tree back together. I really wish Colin Edwin, I think his name is, the bass player, I wish he was involved with this, but I'm not too unhappy to see, Richard Barbieri and Gavin Harrison work with Steven Wilson again, especially considering that, Richard Barbieri's synthesizer playing is just so iconic, and, Gavin Harrison is just a complete beast unto his own on the drums. Although, my problem with this album is it is at number 10 for a reason. It should be much higher, considering it's Porcupine Tree, who, really are one of the most pioneering and excellent progressive rock bands on the scene. This album should be a lot higher than it is, but there was just something about the musicality of it that really made me feel like this album wasn't really meant to be a Porcupine Tree record, even though this is technically the most collaborative Porcupine Tree have ever been on a record. They wrote the songs equally for a change, and yet it still feels like an album that was completed more as a contractual obligation record rather than we really want to put out some cool new stuff that reflects who we are today. That said, there's some really good material on this record. Especially my two favorite tracks from this record, the one that started the whole thing off, Harridan. Even though it isn't Colin Edwin playing that bass part, it's still a great bass part, and, I'm a sucker for a good bass riff, and that song has one. And then the other song being Rat's Return, which, just a really cool driving riff that makes that song just, At number 9, we have Korn's Requiem. Korn, they kind of herald a bit of a, second coming a bit of nu metal. in the 90s, of course, nu metal was all the rage, but, you know, people who weren't really, like, there was a lot of good metal that was also coming out at the same time, and the true metalheads always kind of look down on nu metal, but I think we're starting to see a bit of a renaissance for the genre where, you know, with all the metalcore bands that are coming out and sort of taking on some of that nu metal influence, we're really starting to see the genre sort of make a bit of a return. And Korn just seems to be right there in it going, let's get in on that action. And after a few like really experimental records in the mid 2000s, early 2010s, they brought back Brian Head Welch to play guitar for them and just started doing straight up quality Korn albums again. And Requiem is no exception to that rule. It's just solid Korn tune after solid Korn tune. There isn't a part of the album where anything lulls. It's very solid, keeps a very consistent level of quality the whole way through, and it's a nice short record. You know, it's not much longer than 45 minutes, I think. I'd have to look that up, but it feels like a very short record. Even though it's 9 tracks, it's just one and done, and it's a good listen, you know. If you liked the last few Korn records, Requiem is easily up there with them. It's a good one to check out. At number 8, Star One's Revel in Time. I'm a big Arjen Lucassen fan, you know, that's no secret at all. But I do have to say, his material has been a little lately. I mean, the Transitus album, and I liked the Source. I liked, you know, the Theory of Everything, but I'm starting to get a little bit tired of Arjen, Tommy Karavik, Mike Mills. Like, come on. There are other singers out there. And with Star One, he did at least kind of branch out a little bit. You know, we have Brittany Slays from Unleash the Archers on Fate of Man, which, you know, very much so is my favorite track on this album. He's got Steve Vai. You know, this is another science fiction themed album, and all of the songs are to do with time travel films. You've got themes taken from many different time travel films, including The Terminator, like in The Fate of Man, the movie Primer, which I've heard is just one of the most off-the-wall, completely bonkers time travel films, and that's in the song Prescient, which is sung by Haken's Ross Jennings, a band I really wish had put out an album this year, but they're coming out with one soon. And then, you know, just some really good stuff like Lost Children of the Universe. That's the one Steve Vai is playing on. It's sung by Roy Khan, another Camelot singer, but, you know, at least it's not Tommy Karavik this time. At number 7, Monuments in Stasis. It's just another really good, solid Gent album in a year where that genre really didn't provide any big, you know, hard-hitting names. Monuments clearly has come out on top in the genre for, you know, doing those low-tuned riffs, and, you know, clearly John Brown is just on it. His riff writing skills are undiminished, even though this is, I believe, the first album without lead guitarist Ollie Steele. And, I mean, I do miss Ollie Steele on this record. I kind of wish there was a little bit more lead guitar work going on, but, you know, there's just some really great songs all the same. And, you know, Andy Cizek's vocals are just, I mean, go listen to the single Makeshift Harmony. It's just, wow. Number 6, Black Midi, Hellfire. I have to admit, when I first heard of this band, I kind of hated them because they stole their name from a very obscure genre of music that is now impossible to search for because screw you, Black Midi. But I saw the video for Welcome to Hell and I was hooked. Just wow. And then Sugared Sue, the other big single from the album, also had me hooked. And then, you know, you've got tracks like Still, which kind of bring down the intensity of the album a little bit, but still offer a lot of really cool jazzy, indie, fusion-y kind of tracks. And man, this is just an album of this is what the future of prog rock is going to be. Very friendly to the modern indie crowd, but at the same time, just something that's bonkers and off the wall, and maybe not in the same traditional way as Yes or Genesis or Dream Theater and Fate's Warning, but just something very different, very contemporary, but still kicking a lot of prog rock ass. At number 5, Hallas, Isles of Wisdom. This is a really good sort of retro doom prog. I don't know what to call the genre that they're playing. It's very doom metal, but also very prog rock, very retro. Even the video for the one single Illusion's Gate, which is one of my most listened to songs this year, looks like it was just ripped straight out of the late 70s. There's a lot of very drama era Yes synthesizer work on this record that's just beautiful. The guitar playing is fantastic. I have to say, my favorite tracks on this are, of course, Illusion's Gate that I've already mentioned, Birth/Into Darkness, and Gallivants of Space. Really, really cool tracks. This is an album that I haven't listened to in full a lot. I think I've only really given it a full listen one or two times, but the tracks that I keep coming back to on this record are so good that this is way a step above some of the previous records I've mentioned. At number 4, this is an album I think that is going to be a little controversial to some because I haven't seen it on too many of my peers, top lists. I know that this album is well liked by a lot of my peers. There's not really a lot of people saying that this was a bad album, but not a lot of them have been saying that this is a great album. But the fact is, it only just barely missed the podium, but only just. And this is probably the highest I've ranked an album by this band in a very long time. So we're talking about Marillion with An Hour Before It's Dark. Now, this is an album with some really heavy lyrical themes. This is essentially the band's pandemic record. And especially, with the tracks Only a Kiss and Murder Machines, the lyrics are definitely going to be divisive among, the crowd, depending on your thoughts on the whole pandemic. But they also go into other really heavy topics like slavery in Africa, with Sierra Leone about the diamond mines of blood diamonds. Songs like Be Hard on Yourself, sort of a admonishment of the modern lifestyle. And musically, this is Marillion sort of doing their best modern alternative sound that they've started since they put out Brave back in 94. And they've gradually sort of grown to be more and more of a progressive rock band again since, but a much more modern idea of a progressive rock band. And I feel like An Hour Before It's Dark is really where that progressive alternative rock sound is culminated. And yeah, we have it here on this album, and this is one of their best records in a while, in my opinion. I like it a lot more than Fear. Sounds That Can't Be Made definitely has, some really hard-hitting tracks like Giza, but, An Hour Before It's Dark is pretty much the only Marillion album of the last, 10 years or so that I can honestly say I've spent a lot of time listening to in full, back to front. So I think it's well deserving of a spot on my list. Alright, so now we're at the podium positions. I know I had originally planned to do something to tie in Formula 1 to this list, but it came out janky, but I'm still going to use the podium reference, damn it. And at number 3, we have Steve Vai, Inviolate. And I'm always a good sucker for a good Steve Vai record. You know, he's a shredder, but I find that, like, for the people who really hate the term shred, Steve Vai is still really good at, you know, being a good composer. He's very musical in his approach to shred, and, you know, he really shows that well on a lot of tracks on this album. And some of the things that he does on this album are things that, you know, you could say if anyone else did it, it would be a gimmick. But Steve Vai manages to pull it off in such a way that it just makes sense. And, you know, you take a song like Candle Power, where he essentially comes up with this weird bending technique where he plays chords and bends notes in the middle of them, and it's otherworldly. It doesn't sound like a guitar or anything, you know, that a normal person would play on a guitar. Yet here's Steve Vai showing us all how it's done. And then you've got tracks like Teeth of the Hydra, where he's playing a triple neck monster of an instrument. And, you know, it's not like play one neck, then another neck, and then... No, he's, like, doing things like tapping on one and strumming and then playing another. It's just craziness. And then you've got the song Knapsack, where he's, you know, in a cast in the video and playing everything just hammer-ons and pull-offs with his other hand, and it's just absolutely insane. You know, Steve Vai is the only guitarist that can really pull this off without coming off like a complete gimmick. Because all of these tracks that I've mentioned are insanely musical. They're very informed compositions that sound like someone who's really put in the work to make sure that the piece of music you're hearing is interesting from beginning to end. It isn't just a, you know, slimy show-off of his ability to play the same A major scale over and over again. He's done some really cool things with this album that are just beyond what any normal person would think of when they pick up a guitar. My number 2 album of 2022, and this one's a bit controversial to me because it's really riding on the strength of a single piece of music, is Wilderun's Epigone. I've listened to this album in full a few times, and, you know, each time it has been an absolute ride of a record. No question, like, if you're into that whole, like, prog death kind of style that's being done by bands like Persephone, Neobliviscaris, or, you know, even some, like, more modern sort of progressive metal bands with harsh vocals like The Contortionist, you're probably going to find some really good stuff on this album to pull from it. You know, especially tracks like Passenger, you know, Distraction. Distraction Nola ends the album, and it's an absolute noise fest. Like, you might want to skip that track. But it's the epic track from this album, Identifier, which just blew my mind and has been one of my favorite songs that has come out this year. Just absolutely boggling my brain how good that track is. It's just perfection from beginning to end. You know, the guys in Wilderun did a really good job with that track. And, you know, if you like that one track, the rest of the album is very similar to that. You'll have a very good experience listening to it. I know I have. You know, to name other tracks, like Distraction 1 was really, really good. Like, that's one of the big singles. That's a good starting point if you want to get into this album or this band. But Wilderun, like, I can't recommend the track Identifier enough. It's just such a good track that it elevated this album to number 2 over albums that, you know, probably should have had that spot, to be honest. But Identifier is one of the tracks that really just came through, and it was really close to making this my number 1 album of the year, just based on that one track alone. Like, if Identifier was a single and that was it, it would be my number 1 release of the year, at least until I discovered my number 1 release of the year. Alright, so before we get to my number 1 release of the year, I'm going to go over a few honorable mentions. These are just cuts that didn't really make it into my top 10 list. And, these aren't terrible records. They're just maybe records I've only listened to like once, or, they're good records, but they don't have any standout moments to me. So I'm going to start with Black Country New Roads, Ants from Up There. Good indie release. Like, when I think of indie rock, I'm not really a big fan of a lot of indie, but if more of it was like Black Country New Roads, I'd probably enjoy the genre more. Animals as Leaders, Parisia. It's a pretty standard Animals as Leaders record. They're not really innovating anymore, which kind of bothers me a bit. There was a time when every new Animals as Leaders record was just the most mind-blowing thing I've heard. This one's just, it's standard. It's standard for the band, and I can't complain, but next is Jethro Tull's The Zealot Gene. This is an album I keep forgetting came out this year. I thought it was maybe 2021, 2020. No, that's a 2022 record, and, it has some bright spots. The title track is a lot of fun. Absolutely no complaint there. James LaBrie, A Beautiful Shade of Grey. That's another really great record that, if you love Dream Theater and you want to hear something from James LaBrie that's a little bit different, A Beautiful Shade of Grey is pretty cool. It's a mostly acoustic record, and it's different. It's not like what you would expect James LaBrie to put out, and I thought it was a good record. I really only had, a couple chances to listen to the record, which is why it didn't make my top 10. I think if I had had more of an opportunity to really sit with it and absorb it, it probably would have made my top 10, based on, the single Devil and Drag. That's a fantastic single, and, the rest of the album is pretty much up to that quality. Like I said, I wish I had more time with it. Another really good record that, I contemplated putting on my top 10 list was King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard's Omnium Gatherum. The Dripping Tap is 18 minutes of pure Aussie bliss, but, the album does have some ups and downs. It's kind of a bit all over the place. It's a little bit like a Gizzard Greatest Hits album without having any old material. It's kind of a mix of everything the band has done over the years. Another good one, Queensryche Digital Noise Alliance. Queensryche, they are back to putting out pretty solid old school progressive metal records again. I think this one's probably actually a little bit more progressive than some of the ones that they had been putting out in recent memory. So, hey, it's another album I can give a pretty solid recommendation to. Lastly, this is an album from a band I really like, and I really wish I'd sat and listened to this more often. In fact, I haven't gone back to it a second time. I've only listened to this record once, and it wasn't a very involved listen. But it is one of my favorite bands, and it's Duron Gray, Phalaris. That band is pretty important to this channel because I believe their last album, The Insulated World, was the first review I did for this channel, and, that album had some problems, but I didn't hate it, and from what I remember of listening to this record, this one seems to be going in a little bit more of a melodic direction than Insulated World, but definitely more of a goth, dark, everything is in a minor key feel, as opposed to, something a little more progressive. And I think that's why it maybe turned me off a little. I didn't really feel too compelled to go back to it, but I'm going to give that record another shot. Maybe I'll do a review of it when I finally take the time to really sit and listen to it. Alright, so now, drum roll please, it's my number one album of the year, and it comes from Australia. And it isn't King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard. Ha! Had you there. It is Toehider's I Have Little to No Memory of These Memories. This is a bit of an odd one because this is an album, but it's also a single. It is one single track 47 minutes and 47 seconds long, and it is just pure progressive metal bliss. This is like every era of progressive rock and progressive metal all just kind of smushed into one big track. It's a great story. Every time I've listened to this album, I've gotten a little emotional to it because it's just such a cute story of like a couple of people who get their mind taken over by aliens and build a rocket boat. I mean, how many albums out there can you say have a rocket boat montage? And it's great. I mean, there's a lot of comparisons I guess you could make to like Haken. There's like a doom metal section that's very like Black Sabbath-y. A little bit of like Arion, because let's be real here, Michael Mills, the guy behind Toehider, is at this point most known for his work with Arjen Lucassen, so you're going to have a little bit of that comparison to make, and that's fair. There are bits that maybe sound a little like a band like Tesseract. The ending is just a glorious 80s feel-good montage. You're going to be like fist pumping along the whole time. It made me laugh. It made me cry. It made me fart. It was just perfect. If I could give a physical award to Mike Mills for this record, I would, because it's just so good. It was absolutely brilliant. Brilliant record. So that's my top 10 list of 2022. Now, I'm going to go into a couple other little categories here because I'm just going to do this as one video. I'm not going to split this into like 5 videos. Like, here's my top 10 list, here's my disappointments, here's other categories. None of that. This isn't scripted. I'm just sitting on my couch. Sorry, rhyme signatures, by the way. I have stolen your motif. I may add some plushies in the future. But, we're just chilling. We are just chillaxing in my living room, talking about music. And I do have some disappointments this year. So let's get into them. I'd say the first album that really disappointed me was the new Coheed and Cambria, Vaxis 2, A Window to the Waking Mind. There's some good moments on it. I think the trio of epic tracks that closes out the album is pretty good. And it's definitely better than Vaxis 1. Vaxis 1 was an absolute slog. One of the longest, hardest records I've ever had to sit through. At least this one's shorter and it's a little bit more digestible. Still, it just didn't feel like the kind of great Coheed and Cambria record I wanted out of the band. Maybe that last couple of songs, if more of the album was more in that vein, I probably would have had a more positive opinion of it, but at this point I'm just kind of over Coheed and Cambria. They're not really offering me anything new that I want to hear. Next is Meshuggah's Immutable. Again, this is a band that has at times been the most innovative band in metal. There have been times where every new release from this band completely changed the game. Going from Destroy, Erase, Improve, like where they literally invented Gent, to, Chaosphere just redefining industrial metal, to the album Nothing, which introduced us to the 8-string guitar. And then pretty much everything from Abzan on has just been the band punching a clock. The grooves aren't even really all that special anymore, A baby could count along with these polyrhythms. Meshuggah's not offering anything that we haven't heard from them before. That said, when I returned to the album again later in the year, I didn't find myself hating it as much. But I don't think I'll be really all that stoked for any new Meshuggah material going forward. I hope Frederick Thorndahl, their lead guitarist, does come out with his, Special Defects follow-up, because I'm sure that's probably going to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more nuanced than the new Meshuggah music has been. Now, I already mentioned this record in my top 10, but I actually have to say I did find the new Porcupine Tree to be a bit disappointing. Just on the fact that it sounds like a contractual obligation record rather than, something just made to be a Porcupine Tree record in 2022. Maybe it doesn't help that the band just sort of collected ideas from over the last 10 years to put together for this record, rather than, get together in a room and jam and write a new record. But, yeah, even though it is in my top 10, I still have to say I wasn't really all that stoked on the record at first. It took a couple listens for me to sort of appreciate it more. Another disappointment for me was Architects, the classic symptoms of a broken spirit. That was a tough one to say. Architects have always just kind of been a good, solid metalcore band, and they've always had some really good riffs, always good, melodic lead guitar stuff. Sam Carter has been, doing some really great vocal work lately. But I find, if you had told me, 5 years ago that Architects would become the Imagine Dragons of metal, I wouldn't have believed you, but here we are. This album is just so generic. Even the lyrics, which are usually a strong suit for the band, just fall flat. There really aren't any moments on this record that made me feel like I was listening to a standout band. Just one of the most disappointing performances of the year, but not the most disappointing performance of the year. No, that honor goes to the Mars Volta and their self-titled album. I know a lot of my peers liked this record. I get it. I get that the Mars Volta reuniting in 2022 isn't going to be the same as the Mars Volta in 2012 or 2008 or, when I was rocking Francis the Mute in high school. I get it. But after being initially impressed with the first couple singles and then realizing that the album offered nothing beyond that, I felt just so betrayed by this band. There was nothing about this record that made me think the Mars Volta. This is a pop album. The Mars Volta themselves will tell you that. And I get that my peers enjoyed this record. I did not. That's my opinion. I feel betrayed by the Mars Volta, and I'm not going to listen to this album again. It just bothered me. Alright, so I have one more category, and this is the one where I mentioned on Twitter, I hadn't seen anyone else really do this in any of their videos for a while, so this is a bit of an interesting one, but I'm gonna start it with this video, and this is my Lauscho Hall of Fame, where I recognize an older album that really made an impact on me in 2022. And that album for me had to be Styx's Cornerstone. I'm a big fan of Styx. I grew up listening to this record, among others of theirs, including The Grand Illusion, Paradise Theater, Kilroy Was Here, the classics. And I hadn't listened to Cornerstone in a long time, probably since childhood. And I put it on a bus ride home once and just let it play and realized I still knew all these songs off by heart. That's how much I'd listened to them as a kid. And, it kind of became a bit of an epiphany for me, and I just couldn't stop listening to this record. And to the point where I even went out and, did something I don't normally do. I bought a copy of it on vinyl used from eBay. I don't go on eBay to look for records, but I did for this one. And that's just how much this album really, lifted my 2022. It's been a bit of a rough year, but more so than any of the records that actually came out this year, Cornerstone by Styx was a very lifting moment for me. And I really have to recognize that record, so I think moving forward, I'm going to add this category, just my Hall of Fame, records from the past, whether it's like the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. You know, I'm just going to keep it out of the current decade or the last decade, so, you know, no records from the 2010s. But anything older than that, I think, you know, if a record from that era really touched me in some way, it deserves to be in my Hall of Fame, and I'm going to try to do an album like that every year, where, you know, we add a new Lauscho Hall of Famer to the list. So that's my last category. You know, my number one album of the year, Toehider, I have little to no memory of these memories, and my Hall of Fame record, Styx Cornerstone. I think those are the two records I've just unequivocally loved this year. Anyway, there we go. Again, you know, I know this isn't the greatest video of all time. These blurbs aren't scripted. I'm just kind of popping them off the top of my head. If you came here expecting quality, we got none of that. But I'm still glad that you came and checked out the video. Maybe the next couple will come off a little less awkward. And it's been fun, you know? Even though this hasn't been the greatest year for music for me, there's still been a lot of really good stuff that's come out all the same, and hey, maybe some of this will be your future favorite record. Anyway, Lauscho, out.